Well, welcome. Glad you're with us, and welcome to everybody who is on Zoom as well to the first meeting of our season for the 2025-26 season programs at the Mendocino Coast Audubon Society. And big thanks to Mary Glanville for putting together a terrific slate of programs for y'all. Starting with tonight, a really excellent way to start off our season. So we got a lot to look forward to over the next few months. Before we get to the program, just a few things to let everybody know about. You may already know if you keep up with us on the newsletter or on our website, MendocinoCoastAudubon.org, then you probably know there is a bird walk at the Botanical Gardens the day after tomorrow, the early bird walk. I will unfortunately miss it, but Roger Adamson is going to step up and lead that, and he's better at it than I am anyway, so that works out great. And then our field trips leader, Matt Franks, has come up with a great new field trip that's really exciting. He's going to lead an overnight camping trip at Usal State Beach, just up here, just south of the Lost Coast. And if you've never been to Usal, it's really an interesting place in every way. Getting there is an adventure, and then once you're there, it's probably the single best vagrant stops for migrating songbirds and shorebirds both on the Mendocino coast. It's situated, like I said, right at the south end of the Lost Coast, and so a lot of birds that are flying south down the coast, it's the first place they come to for about 30 miles that looks habitable because it's got this immense patch of alders and willows. So a lot of them just descend on that. So it's a very cool place. That's coming up next Monday and Tuesday. They're going to, I think, do an overnight camping on Monday night. And you can join, if you want to get up early in the morning and just go up there on Tuesday, you can do that. Or you can go up Monday and stay overnight and hit it first thing in the morning. Very exciting stuff, and Matt's he's a great field trip leader, so that's really exciting. A new thing for us to try that kind of thing. Coming up, next month's program will be Dan Arola, a personal friend of mine who is going to talk about purple martins and their breeding strategies in California, and I'll just give you a little foreshadowing. The County of Mendocino is the purple martin breeding hotspot in Northern California. There are more of them here, and in particular, they're more successful on the coast and also at the Willis Bypass. Those are the two best places in the state right now for purple martin breeding success. So it's really a local story. It's really cool. Coming up this Saturday, it's Coastal Cleanup Day all along the coast. And as we have done for, I don't even know, at least 10 years, the Mendocino Coast Audubon Society is doing a team led by Angela Liebenberg and Matt Liebenberg up at 10 Mile. So you can meet, I think, at 9 in the morning at 10 Mile, the 10 Mile River parking lot just south of the bridge there. And show up with gloves and maybe a trash bag, and Angela will have some of that, so just show up and clean off whatever trash you can find on 10 Mile Beach. It's a big deal, and you can see birds while you're doing it. Yeah, and that's a little legacy of Art Morley. He led that for many, many years, and so I'm glad to see that it will continue. Over the peninsula instead of going around. Yeah. And then even crazier, that's the third one that's been seen from shore in just like a week. There was one, Catherine found one on the Navarro River, 3 days ago? A really weird looking parasitic jaeger, a juvenile parasitic jaeger with a white head, very strange bird. And then Todd Easterly found one just a few days before that, also in the Navarro River. So it's parasitic jaeger season all over, apparently. Yeah. Yeah, so parasitic jaegers are a funny bird. They do this sometimes. They're a seabird, an offshore seabird. They're normally only found out over the ocean. They don't come on land at all except to nest, and they do that in the Arctic, nowhere near here. And so to see one from shore, they usually do that when they're chasing, they're kleptoparasites. They go after other seabirds and rob them of their food. They just beat them up until they disgorge whatever they're eating. And they will sometimes follow terns or small gulls up the rivers. Terns will sometimes come into the lagoons to kind of rest up, and the parasitic jaegers will sometimes follow them in, and that's how they get in the rivers.
Brown booby on a pelagic trip.
Yeah, so if you've been reading the newsletter, you know we've been doing a lot of pelagic trips, offshore seabirding, and we did one that was actually not a seabirding trip. We did a half-day marine mammal trip to go see whales and dolphins, which we saw in abundance, large numbers of both, just a great show. But it also turned out to be a great morning of birding, even though that wasn't the purpose of the trip. We didn't even do a slick. But we had 2 South Polar skuas, and the grand prize of all was a brown booby, or it used to be called brown booby. It's now called Cocos booby. Gorgeous, gorgeous bird, a sulid, very rare up here. That's maybe the 5th record, I think, for Mendocino County. And it flew right by us, right by the boat. Everybody got great looks. So it's happening out there, and we're going to do more trips early October. Go to noyopelagics.com for the schedule, and plenty of room on the boat. Really exciting stuff. And the eastern kingbird on Casper Pond. What a show that bird put on. It stayed there for 3 days, I think, which was great because a lot of birders wanted to come and see it. And that was, weirdly, that was the 4th eastern kingbird to be seen on the coast in just like a week. Lisa Walker found 3 at one time at Virgin Creek, which is just mental. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Turns out they have actually bred in Northern California. They've been recorded nesting up in Lassen National Park. So they're apparently a population that got on the wrong side of the Rocky Mountains and can't find their way back and just decided to make the most of it. Like a lot of us, they come to California and think, why would I leave? Right? Well, it's an exciting time because it's migration season, so I guess I'll just wrap that up by saying don't take any birds for granted. When you look out your window, look closely at every bird because your feeder will draw in vagrant birds as well. They see your normal birds feeding there and they'll come down to join them, so keep an eye. You never know what you're going to see. All right, let's proceed on to the whole reason you all came here tonight. Which, oddly enough, I just lost on my phone. That's weird. Well, anyways, this is a great night because we got a great speaker on a really great topic, all in one. Catherine used to volunteer at the Lindsay Wildlife Center, and I didn't even realize until just recently that it was the first wildlife rehabilitation center in the United States. Wow. It opened in 1970. That was 55 years ago. And so it has been groundbreaking in many ways, and a great place, a really fascinating place. And they currently do something like, 5,000 birds a year?
Right,
yeah.
around 5,000.
Yeah, 5,000 birds a year they take in at this hospital.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. And other animals as well. It's not just birds, yeah.
A lot of them are birds.
Yeah. We'll hear all about that. Our guest speaker tonight is Jillian Jorgenson, who is, I just lost your actual title. The Wildlife Husbandry Coordinator is her title. And she's got degrees in environmental work and also in conservation. And so has taken on this job with Lindsay just in the last couple of years, and has got a lot of great stories to tell us about what is involved in wildlife rehabilitation and how you do it and all the fun stuff. So welcome, Jillian, and thanks for making the journey up here.
Well, thank you, folks. Okay, that does work. I am going to keep a timer for myself up here since I know we have a limited amount of time, and I want to make sure I don't go over because, unfortunately, I can and will talk forever about this stuff. So I am here to, as previously stated, talk a little bit about the Lindsay wildlife experience, looking specifically at our wildlife hospital, looking at where it started versus where we are now. So just a brief little bit about myself here. My name is Jillian Jorgenson, as was introduced, and I have a Bachelor of Science degree in Zoo and Conservation Science from Audubon University and a Master of Science in Environmental Science and Policy with an emphasis on conservation science. I have worked with a wide variety of animals in a number of different settings over the years and have kind of ended up settling into this position with the Lindsay Wildlife Hospital only since last May. So I'm coming up on being there about a year and a half at this point. This is the third wildlife rehab hospital that I have worked with, both as a volunteer and an intern with previous facilities. So it was fantastic to kind of find myself in a position of being in a full-time role at one of these places. So I've worked with all of these different animals, but one of the things that I always end up circling back to is working with birds. My position as the hospital coordinator allows me to work with pretty much anything that comes in through the hospital's doors. If it isn't medical related for daily care of these patients, that kind of falls under my umbrella of things that I'm keeping an eye out for. So a lot of developing patient-appropriate diets for the different animals that come in, proper enclosure setup for them, enrichment, conditioning needs, and then ultimately coordinating with our volunteers when these animals get released back out into the wild. So it's a little bit of everything. I'm able to work with a wide variety of species, but the vast majority of them are patients that are going to spend time in our bird room at the hospital. So we'll kind of get into more of the hospital side in just a few minutes, but since I know that folks up here might not know a ton about Lindsay Wildlife, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the overview of our history, kind of where we started and how we ended up where we are now. So the Lindsay Wildlife Experience is located actually in Larkey Park in Walnut Creek. We are in the East Bay region, relatively close to San Francisco. So the museum is located here. We have on-site enclosures for our animals, aviaries, outdoor pen space, and then we also have a large number of volunteers that have home care structures as well, so aviaries and pens set up off-site. And as you can see on our little map here, we are literally right in this park, and then this big blank space on the map is all housing development. So we're a little bit landlocked as far as how we can possibly expand in the future, but right now this is kind of what we have to work with, and we've actually been in this area more or less from the start. What's indicated here in this little dark rectangle is what we call the old pump house, which was the original Lindsay Wildlife Museum when we first got started. So to go through a little bit of a timeline here, all of this began with Alexander Lindsay, who started this journey for us back in the 1950s, basically with a garage full of natural history specimens, a passion for wildlife conservation, and a dream. This guy would hold informal classes and hold neighborhood nature hikes in his area to inspire others to appreciate and care about the world that they live in. So when ultimately, in 1955, the Diablo Junior Museum Association was founded. This also began the Diablo Junior Museum, which is where we formally got our start back in 1955. So jumping ahead a few years, unfortunately following the passing of Alexander Lindsay in 1962, the museum was renamed in his honor to the Alexander Lindsay Junior Museum. So this is where we have that name starting to get tied into our official title. Now, the name changed periodically throughout the years, so I'm not covering every single time the name changed. By the time we got into the old pump house building here, which is still standing next to our current building, it had that name, Alexander Lindsay Junior Museum. I'm trying to remember if that sign is still on the building, but the building itself is still there. We primarily use it for storage right now, but it's kind of interesting that we still have the old building right next door. So that was created in 1965, formally giving us a structure that we could have the museum specimens, we could have people come in, they would offer these different programs throughout the day. And then the interesting part, at least on my end of things, is in 1970, we took a giant leap forward in wildlife conservation by opening the nation's first wildlife rehabilitation hospital. Since the Alexander Lindsay Junior Museum was kind of this beacon in its region for natural history, wildlife conservation work, people would often bring sick and injured or orphaned animals there asking, what do we do with this? So as a response to the fact that we had all of these people coming to us for help, that was when we finally got the hospital founded. So the original building was not originally intended to have a hospital tied into it, so we kind of had to make do with the space that we had. And in later years, once we moved into our current building, we were able to keep that in mind and actually design it more with that. An important part of our history in 1974 that I, of course, need to talk about, this is our ambassador turkey vulture, Lord Richard. He was hatched at a museum in San Francisco in 1974. He just celebrated his 51st birthday this summer. To our knowledge, he is the oldest turkey vulture, at least in the United States. We had a huge celebration for him last year when he hit 50, but we always have events and things going on celebrating him during the summer. He is in his very own aviary setup right in front of our building in what we refer to as the Lord Richard's Court. When you first come in, you have to walk through Lord Richard's Court to come up to our front door. So he holds a very special place in the heart of many of us that work and volunteer here. And then in 1993, we were able to raise, through a capital campaign, a number of millions of dollars to build an actual proper structure that now houses our museum as well as the wildlife hospital. And this is the building that we are currently located in. At the time that this building was constructed in '93, we had gone through name changes again, and we were called the Lindsay Wildlife Museum. This logo was actually still on some signs with arrows directing people to our facility today. So still, if you drive around Walnut Creek and you're relatively close, you'll see signs for the Lindsay Wildlife Museum, even though our name has since changed since that. So it wasn't until only 10 years ago, in 2015, that we formally changed our name again to the Lindsay Wildlife Experience to better represent kind of our role in the community and what people kind of came to expect from us. We aren't just a museum. We have programming and events going on throughout the day with our live ambassador animals, our education staff, and the hospital as well. We started out as a museum, but over time greatly changed and evolved, and this change of name was meant to reflect that. So now, in our current year of 2025, we have been celebrating our 70th anniversary of the Lindsay Wildlife Experience as a whole, where our mission statement now is preserving wildlife's tomorrow. And I have just a couple of our beloved ambassador animals on here. We have Chucky the Chuckwalla, Bubo, our great horned owl who has an immense amount of sass in his little bird body, and Clem, one of our newest ambassadors, a western pond turtle who's super people friendly and will come right up to you in his terrarium. We all love Clem. So the museum as a whole is celebrating its 70th anniversary this year. And so to give a little bit of an overview of what we offer today, this is Chucky again at a outreach event that I actually tabled for earlier this summer. I didn't know that they could be trained to be on a little harness, but apparently they can. So we are very much still a museum. We have museum exhibits, we have natural history specimens, we have an entire natural history department for creating new specimens, preserving the ones that we have in our collection, building new exhibits on the grounds of the museum. We have a number of interactive family exhibits as well, such as our What's Wild, What's Not area, where we have some more domestic animals on display so people can get a better sense of what makes a good pet versus things that should be kept in the wild. We have an interactive Raptors, Hunters in the Sky exhibit that has a little VR video for kids to enjoy, experience flying like a raptor. And then we have our Hive Alive section about local pollinators, and we have a beehive on site that's actually in a really cool setup. It's in like an acrylic case where you can see the whole hive, and then there's the little tube leading outside so the bees can all come and go, and it's tended by a local bee community. So those are just a couple of our interactive exhibits. We very much are a family museum. A lot of our programming is geared more towards families with children, but there's something there for everybody. We have daily programming that happens with our education and animal encounters staff. This may include live animals if they feel like participating in programming for the day. We never force the animals to do things they don't want to do. So sometimes they may be involved and sometimes it may be working with some of our museum specimens. As I mentioned, we have a number of ambassador animals such as Chucky here and some of the other animals on our previous slide. There are a few different positions and aviaries and setups on site that we may have animals on display throughout the day. And then they get cycled out so that not one or two particular birds have to deal with being oohed and awed over all day. We're working on some renovations to get a section of our outdoor exhibit space in a little bit of a better arrangement for people to be able to go out and take a look at some of those aviaries. We also do a number of special events, hikes, and school visits throughout the year. And we have plenty of opportunities for teaching the future. We have a variety of internships that we have throughout the year, both in the hospital and the education, the animal encounters departments. We have a ton of volunteers that are constantly running around helping us do the work that we do. And the hospital also hosts a number of vet students throughout the year as externs. So they'll come in and shadow our vets and our vet techs throughout the year. And then, of course, this is something that I'm tied a little bit more into, is this interesting thing that we have called the Wildlife Hospital Behind the Scenes. This is a special room in the museum that's kind of set up as an amphitheater with a big two-way mirror on the wall. So they can see into one of our treatment areas, and then from the treatment room side, it just looks like a mirror. So once a day, at varying times throughout the year, depending on if it's off-season or summer season, people can basically go in and chat with one of the techs and see a little bit of what the hospital has to do. The behind-the-scenes experience varies every single day, and it very much depends on what animals we have in, what kind of rechecks we have going for that day. Sometimes it might be an intake exam for a new patient, or it could be an exam or treatment for a patient that's been in care for a while. So kind of shifting a little bit to the wildlife hospital side, which is where I work. The wildlife hospital, you saw, was only established in 1970 to present. So we aren't celebrating our 70th anniversary yet, but we are celebrating our 55th this year. And of course, I had to include on our slide some of our little baby opossums. This was a group from last summer, and we joked that the opossum printer was running out of ink by the time it got to our last one. So we'll get back to our lovely possum friends here in a few minutes, but they, as a brief spoiler for a future slide, these guys are the #1 intake that we receive at the hospital every single year. So we'll shift gears a little bit now into the hospital, taking a look at who we are and the kinds of work that we do. So our ultimate goal here is to provide the best medical and husbandry care that we can to the native wild animals that need it, that are brought into us by members of the public. Care is both provided on-site as well as off-site. We aren't able to keep 5,000 animals on-site throughout the year, so we have a fantastic crew of trained home care volunteers that will actually take some of the animals back to their own homes, their own properties, and take care of a lot of them there. If you think about little baby squirrels or raccoons that need round-the-clock bottle feedings, we don't really have the means to do that in what is essentially a wildlife emergency room. So we really do rely on this team of volunteers to allow us to continue taking care of all the animals that we have brought in. And on that note, the hospital is made up of a number of different people. Members like myself make up some of our support staff, but we also have part-time and full-time veterinarians, full-time veterinary technicians, rehab technicians, myself being support staff, seasonal interns that just finished up their summer internship, so unfortunately a lot of them have been leaving us, but we hope they'll come back someday. And then approximately 350 volunteers that make up shifts throughout the week. And we really could not do what we do without them. And just to give you a little peek at what a day in the life at the hospital, all the craziness that we have to deal with, during our peak season, which we are thankfully coming off of now, the hospital may admit somewhere between 30 to 40 new patients or more every single day. That's our intake volunteers interacting with the public to bring those animals in. The vast majority of people that bring us animals in are fantastic. They're doing the right thing. Unfortunately, you do get a lot of people that are very emotional bringing in something that's hurt or injured, and you just kind of get a wide variety of personalities that you may have to interact with. So all of these various things that we may have brought into the hospital may include patients that are orphaned animals that need round-the-clock feedings to grow up big and strong. We may have displaced animals that lost their nests when tree limbs were cut down. Unfortunately, this happens a lot. We may have birds with head trauma from flying into windows or walls all throughout the year. We have any number of animals, some larger than you might expect, to smaller ones being brought in off of sticky traps, which is not a fun time for anyone involved. We have wildlife that come in suffering from traumatic injuries due to any number of instances, such as vehicle collisions, rare cases, gunshot wounds, or last year we even had a turkey vulture come in that had been electrocuted after flying into an electrical post. That was actually a really interesting case because we had heard about a small brush fire that broke out, and then we got this turkey vulture in from the same area, and we kind of put two and two together that maybe this turkey vulture flying into the electrical post started this brush fire, which thankfully did not last for very long, but that was kind of an interesting case of something coming in and going, wait a minute. We also see a large number of animals that came in caught or injured by cats and dogs. And I have some statistics on this on later slides, but that's kind of something that we try and do a lot of public education about because that's a very easy thing that people can do to help local wildlife. So all of these patients, no matter what their cause of intake, are brought into the hospital. They're examined by our veterinary staff, and they are provided the best and most humane care possible. Of course, we all want that to be putting them through treatment, getting them to a point of being fully recovered and releasable, but quite often the most humane thing that we can do for instances where they come in with severely traumatic injuries is humane euthanasia, which is not something that a lot of people like to think about, but ultimately we're giving them a kinder end than they may have had out in the wild. So before I get too much further in here, I do have a slide here to just show a bit of gratitude for our wonderful volunteers. As I said, we have about 350 of them on shift throughout the week, and we really could not do any of what the hospital does without this crew of people. Many hands makes the work that much lighter. So this includes around 60,000 volunteer hours recorded each year across all of our hospital shifts. So that's the amount of time put into this by our volunteers. We have a special team of hotline volunteers that go through phone calls left on our voicemails so that we can get back to members of the public with wildlife questions. In 2024, they logged over 7,000 calls from the public that they responded to give guidance and feedback. And then we also have more than 30 dedicated teams of home care volunteers, each devoted to a specific species and how best to care for them. Just a couple examples of this are our raccoon team, our squirrel team, our possum team. We have a number of raptor home care folks with aviaries or those that bring chicks home for hand rearing. We have a little bit of everything that make up these different teams that provide specialty round-the-clock care that otherwise would not be possible in our hospital settings. So we'll take a look now at some of the patient admission statistics from last year. I have had so much fun going back through all of our data and kind of looking for different trends and interesting things to point out. This was one of our red-tailed hawks that we released last year, and by we, I mean I actually got to go out and take this one to release. So she's very special to me, and I have some lovely pictures of her. So to get us started here, I have some of the basic statistics, and we'll kind of go more specific from there. So last year in 2024, we admitted 4,602 patients, which was roughly a 6.8% increase in patient intakes from the previous year. And of all of those patients brought in, we had representatives of 155 different species, which was just about a 2% increase from the previous year. So more significant increase in the total number of patients, but slight increase in the species diversity as well. All of those patients could be broken down into 12 amphibians that were brought in, 2,845 birds, many of which were babies, 1,679 mammals, and 66 reptiles. So just as a brief note, while we go through some of these different statistics, the Lindsay Wildlife Hospital is not able to admit every single animal that comes to us. There are certain things that we have to redirect to other more appropriate facilities, such as domestic or companion species, agricultural or exotic species. We might defer to local veterinarians. Introduced and invasive species, we are not able to take. Kind of a common thing that comes up are rock doves, or as we affectionately call them, garbage pigeons. But there are thankfully other facilities that have a larger capacity that they are able to take in. So we do still have nearby facilities that we work closely with that we're able to redirect them to. Lindsay also does not take in waterfowl or shorebirds because we don't have the space for the necessary rehab setups for them. We don't really have pool space, unfortunately. And these are all going to be directed up to our neighbors at International Bird Rescue. So we work very closely with them as well. The main exception to this is throughout the summer, if we get groups of young baby mallards brought in, we're able to temporarily house them until we're able to run them up to IBR. So smaller things like that we're able to keep kind of contained for a time. But otherwise, this is the majority of the breakdown of our patients for last year. But we did have one unexpected bonus intake last year that kind of took all of us by surprise, and that is one patient was a gastropod, a lovely banana slug. So we don't really admit invertebrate species, otherwise people would be bringing us all kinds of creepy crawlies. However, last September, so from where we are right now, we had somebody return from a camping trip and found a hitchhiker amongst their camping gear and brought it to us because they didn't know what else to do with it. They just suddenly had a banana slug with them. They were not prepared for that responsibility of having a banana slug. Thankfully, we were prepared for that responsibility. And we ended up housing it in a terrarium at the hospital for a couple weeks because it just so happens that my boss was coming up here for his own camping trip a few weeks later. So we just held on to it, gave it some produce if it so chose to eat any of it. It didn't. We made sure it stayed plenty moist and it just hung out in one corner of its terrarium, I swear, the entire time it was there. And he got released a couple weeks later on a different camping trip. Point of note, this is not the banana slug. We didn't have very good pictures of the one that we had in care. So this is one that I found at Muir Woods earlier this year, but it gets the point across. So that's a very uncommon circumstance for us. We don't usually get these kinds of patients in, and we try not to make a habit of it. But when duty calls, we will take care of the banana slugs.
I got a lot of them.
I'm sure. So a common thing that people ask us for all of the patients that we get brought in every single year, number of thousands of patients, is what is the survival rate for a lot of these animals? How many are you able to turn around at the end of the year and say, made it back out to the wild? So when we're looking at these statistics for patient survival rate, kind of an important note that I like to highlight is that the first 24 hours in care is critical for all of these patients, regardless of why it was they were brought in. They are potentially injured, stressed, malnourished, dehydrated. They're in a strange environment being handled by aliens, basically, poking and prodding them. And if anything's going to happen, it's most likely to happen in 24 hours. Any calls of if this patient we think is going to make it long term or if humane euthanasia is more necessary. However, once we get past that first 24 hours, we actually have a pretty good success rate overall for a wildlife rehab hospital. So throughout 2024, from all of our patients that passed the first 24 hours, we saw a survival rate of about 82%. These patients were either released or they were transferred to other facilities to continue their rehab process. So we typically average around a 70% success rate, I want to say, each year, but last year, looking at the statistics, was a pretty good year for us that we were able to get over 80%. So hopefully this year we will have a similar number. And I'll kind of point things out as I go. These are a couple of dark-eyed juncos. These were some of our first babies that we had come in this year. And quite often when we have new baby birds brought in, they get handed straight to me because bird room is my domain. That's where I live 90% of the time. And I love them all dearly. So we have a wide variety of reasons why patients are admitted to the hospital, but in 2024, these were our top 5 categories. So number 1 was cat interactions, whether that was caught by a cat and brought into people or it was attacked out in the yard and somebody went and got it. And then closely followed then by patients that were orphaned. We see a lot of nests of baby birds where something may have happened to the parents. And so the whole nest is brought in, especially hummingbirds. People will bring us whole hummingbird nests. We see this a lot as well for baby squirrels and baby opossums. So that's why that kind of makes up a large number of patient intakes. And then we kind of drop off a bit to our next three categories, which are window and wall collisions, displacement from nest, and nest habitat disturbance or destruction, which these kind of work together in a way, because if the habitat is destroyed, they're kind of being displaced from their nests as well. So I just kind of wanted to point this out because looking back historically, a lot of our previous data sets indicate that orphaned patients are what we see the most often. So it kind of stuck out to me that last year, even by just such a narrow margin, that cat interactions actually beat out orphaned as our number one cause of patient intake. So I have just a few points here, and as birders, I'm sure a lot of you have already seen or heard very similar information to this. So we had 313 patients that were brought in due to being caught or injured by cats. This was made up by 56 different species, and we have kind of a breakdown here of some of the different animals that came in as a result of cat interactions. Kind of fascinating to me because we have some species that you look at and go, yeah, that makes sense. Hummingbirds, mourning doves, house finches. I'm surprised. I'm sure there would be quite a fight put up by the jays there. They are very feisty. But then we also had a number of raptors varying in sizes that also came into us because of cat interactions. The same thing also goes for mammals. We have smaller things like pocket gophers, desert cottontails. More often, it's going to be the young Virginia opossums, but we have seen instances of older ones as well. Fox squirrels, and unfortunately bats. This is a hard one because they are considered a rabies vector species. And it's kind of difficult when you bring rabies vector species in that have had direct contact with pets or other people without any kind of protection, because unfortunately you can't really test for rabies in live patients. We also had a number of reptiles that were brought in because of cat interactions. No amphibians though, but then we didn't have very many amphibians brought in last year. Of the 313 patients brought in due to being caught or injured by a cat, these patients had a 65.49% survival rate after the first 24 hours, which is a fair bit lower than our overall survival rates. These patients tend to need more antibiotics, medications to make sure that they don't get any kinds of additional injuries or diseases, infections spread to them by the cats. So we always encourage people to keep cats indoors for the cat safety as well as the wildlife. We are big fans at the hospital of catios, and a number of our volunteers swear by them for keeping their cats entertained while still having some nice outdoor time as well. So we have that information about our cat interactions. And then we have, right after that, we saw was orphaned as our second leading cause for patient intake. That had an 81.58% survival rate after the first 24 hours. So a vast difference from the cat-caught patients. And that was right about where we were for overall patient survivability last year. So if they come into us young, we're able to get them past the first 24 hours. They had a very good chance of making it all the way through. So here we have a breakdown of the top 10 species that we saw at the hospital last year. As I spoiled on an earlier slide, the Virginia opossum is always our number one patient that we get brought in. If you think about it, opossums have very large litters of babies. And we always tell people if one baby falls off of mom's back, she's not going to turn around and go back and get them. So if a baby falls off too soon and it can't take care of itself, those are the ones that people pick up and bring into us. So after the opossums, which always makes up a very large number of our patient intakes, it went house finches, eastern fox squirrels, mourning doves, honest hummingbirds, and oddly last year, barn owls. We had over 200 of them brought into the hospital. The previous year, I want to say we had like 40 or 50 total for the entire year. So last year was a really bizarre year for us because the last time we had a number anywhere near this was back in 1999. So a little bit of a closer look at some of these patient cases now that we've seen some of the intake statistics. This was a very cool belted kingfisher that came in last year. 2024, we don't really have a better way of putting it other than it was an owl apocalypse. Literally, we had that on a whiteboard as we kept a daily tally of the number of barn owls that came in. We had 248 brought in last year, which was a significant increase from previous years. Okay, I did have this in my slides. 2023, we had 42. So we went from 42 to 248, and our staff and our home care volunteers were going absolutely crazy. So our previous record prior to that was 202 admitted in 1999. And we are in part attributing this to the fact that the California vole kind of had a boom in population last year. According to California vole sightings from iNaturalist, that spiked during 2024. So that was a much higher than normal food supply for a lot of these raptors. It was kind of interesting that we didn't have as extreme of an uptick in other raptor species, but the barn owl especially, we had so many last year. And then I have this little note here about why the fancy pedicure, because as you probably can see, this owl has lovely painted blue nails. For a lot of our raptors, right before they're getting ready to be released, which this one's getting its release exam, we will often paint their nails a certain color. So if for whatever reason they go out and they start not doing well and that bird gets caught again and brought back in, if we see that it has colored nails, then we know that was one of ours, and we can go back through our patient records and pull up its old file rather than admitting it as a brand new patient. We have all of its previous medical information. And of course, that doesn't last forever, but at least for the first few days after they get released. One more note while I'm on this topic, fun use that we have for our handy dandy nail polishes in the hospital is actually for our goldfinches and identifying them in care. For pretty much anything else, we're able to band them with a certain color and number. That way we can tell all of our patients apart. The goldfinches, however, are very small. You can band them, but getting the band off without hurting their leg is very difficult. So to tell them apart, we use our lovely nail polish and we paint their nails and put a little dot of color on their beak to help tell them apart. So one of my fantastic responsibilities as the husbandry coordinator is periodically going through and repainting our goldfinches, or doing bird spa, as I often refer to it. A couple interesting things that we had come through as well regarding window strikes, specifically in migratory species. So collisions with a window or a wall is one of our more common reasons for patient intake. And it especially poses a challenge for rehabbing migratory species, so things that we need to get back out quickly so they don't miss their migration, as was the case with this western tanager that we had last year. So patients that are brought in after window strikes may suffer from head injuries and need time to recover from that, as well as spending time back out in the aviaries to build up their endurance so they're able to get back out and rejoin their migrations. So we need to make sure that these patients are healed in a way that is satisfactory for the patient's care, but also not hold them back longer than necessary, to make sure that they don't miss migration. That was especially a concern for this tanager. I think we got it a little bit later into what its migration would have been. So we needed to make sure that it got released back where it came from so it could rejoin with other birds and continue on its merry way. But this guy did get successfully released last year. It was also an interesting year for us because we actually had a couple of burrowing owls admitted at Lindsay last summer. These are very rare for us. Before 2024, we hadn't seen any of them since 2019, and we've only seen 121 at Lindsay, period. So looking back through our records, we didn't have a lot to go off of. We had the two that came in. Patient number 3985 here had been attacked by a larger hawk, so it had a number of puncture wounds kind of on its body, on its wings. It had some bruising as well. So it otherwise was in fairly good shape, and it made a pretty quick recovery. And this guy actually got banded by a local biologist for a field study as well. So there was much to do with the release of this bird. And then shortly after this one, we had patient 4354 that came in as a window strike. This one stayed with us a little bit longer, other than the obvious potential head trauma that it needed to recover from. This poor guy also had a small lesion on its tongue from biting its tongue during impact, and also had a small beak fracture that ended up being surgically repaired by our veterinarians on site. So this recovery did take a little bit longer. It didn't get the fancy federal bans, but it also made a successful recovery and was released back out into the wild. So since this was a little bit of a more spotlighted case study, we have a bit more to go on with patient 3985. This guy only stayed 19 days at the hospital before ultimately being re-released. And it was fitted with these fancy federal bands, as well as a little telemetry backpack so that it can be tracked for future field research. So that was something that doesn't happen very often when we get to federally banned and put telemetry backpacks on things. So it was a very interesting couple of weeks with this guy. And then before we move into our more current period of time, I wanted to just give a couple of highlights of some of the interesting cases that we had in 2024. I figured you folks here with Audubon would appreciate seeing some of these guys. So we had one belted kingfisher that came in. These are not my pictures, by the way. Some of the patients were a bit scruffier than this, so these are all from Cornell. We had two black-chinned hummingbirds that came in. We most often see Anna's hummingbirds as well as a fair number of Allen's hummingbirds. We had one Bullock's oriole and one golden-crowned kinglet. We also had one northern saw-whet owl, which we do not see very often at the hospital as well. I love these guys. Yeah. Tiny owls in general are a special weakness to me. We had two peregrine falcons come in. We had two pine siskins, which I'll circle back to in a second. And then we had one tricolored blackbird amongst plenty of other species that had come in one or two at a time. Just a brief note with the pine siskins. We've kind of been in a lull with this species in recent years, but every now and then you would have an eruption of pine siskins. In some years, I want to say it's been 10 years or so, maybe within the last 10 years, we experienced an eruption and had almost 100 brought in over the course of the year. Generally, it's going to be about less than 10, more often less than 5 brought in a year. But then you can really tell when an eruption is happening, when that number spikes way up high. So we haven't experienced one recently, but we'll see what future years hold for us. So we'll take a brief look here with the bit of time I have remaining at how 2025 has compared so far. All of the numbers and patient stories that I have on these slides are up through the end of August, just because it's neater to go through the end of one month as opposed to whenever I was finishing these slides up at the beginning of this one. So currently, January 1st through August 31st, these are some of our top reasons for intake, and I am directly comparing them to where we were in 2024. So the blue bars are this year, and the brown bars are last year. So currently, our number one cause of patient intake is orphaned patients with 393 compared to 283 last year. Cat interactions, we are down at 272, which is still above where we were this time last year. For our other top 5 patient intake causes this year, we had wall and window collisions, patients that were grounded for whatever reason, they couldn't get off of the ground. And then we also had a pretty decent number of dog interaction patients brought in as well. Cats are the bigger culprit, of course, but especially people that let their dogs run off-leash places tend to get their noses into things that they probably shouldn't. And then comparing that to some of our other causes of intake that were in the top 5 in 2024, such as displaced from nest and nest habitat disturbance or destruction, we're down a little bit from where it was this time last year, but not by too much. So we'll see how the rest of the year ends up going and what our ultimate final stats end up being at the end of the year.
Sorry.
Okay. So as I kind of mentioned here, we do have a fairly noticeable increase in the number of orphaned patients that have come in this year compared to last year. And at least myself personally, I'm blaming this on the fact that we've had a major uptick in admissions of one particular species, which was the opossums. It's always our number one cause of intake, but as of the end of August, we had almost hit 1,000 opossums brought in this year. And we don't entirely know why that is, at least not at this particular time. For the barn owls, we at least knew that the vole population was partially to blame because they were eating really well and having more babies. But for the opossums, we're not entirely sure what's going on there. The rest of our top 5 species are pretty much what we see every year. The house finch, fox squirrel, honest hummingbird, and mourning doves are usually in the top 5. But just this number in particular is a bit crazy to us. Last year was our owl-pocalypse. This year is our opocalypse for the opossums. And again, we have a whiteboard going at our intake desk making tally marks each day of how many opossums came in. I wish I knew what we were at as of today and whether or not we've reached 1,000 yet. But if we haven't yet, we will probably soon. There was also a more significant increase in house finches, but not nearly to the same extent. I'm, again, not entirely sure why that is for house finches. It could have been that, at least where we are, it hasn't been as scorching of a summer as it was last year, so they might be having more clutches, but that's my theory on it. Last year we had a couple weeks of almost consistent 100-degree heat, so would not recommend. And then one kind of interesting case study that we've had going on right now is an osprey, number 3848. We had a couple osprey that came in last year, but this one's been kind of a special case for us this year due to the fact that it was admitted with these couple of fish hooks, one embedded into a wing and one embedded right at the base of its neck. So he came into us with the fish hooks as well as fishing gear being tangled up. He had been kind of hanging on a fence. So this poor friend has thankfully been recovering very well and was recently transferred to a facility in Sonoma that had a 100-foot aviary for it, so it can start building up those wing muscles again to get released. Osprey are really finicky to work with in care because of their special adaptations for diving and catching fish. It's really hard to get them to eat on their own in human care. So at least while this bird was with us, we had to do twice-a-day hand feedings. And to kind of make it a less stressful event for this osprey rather than forcing its mouth open every single time, kind of an odd case, we actually managed to clicker train the osprey to open its mouth and take smelt from us while it was in care. So it was kind of a less stressful way for us to be able to do that a few times a day. I love this bird, but it was so ungrateful. I got fresh salmon heads for it, and it wanted nothing to do with it because these guys don't eat on their own in captivity. But thankfully, as I said, this guy was just like brought over to another facility, transferred to another facility, literally just this past Saturday. So it was starting to build up a bit more muscle in our biggest 50-foot aviary, but for these guys, based on the current wildlife rehab regulations put out by CDFW, they put out a whole new set of regulations this year, and osprey do need a 100-foot aviary to go through as pre-release. So we don't have the means to do that, but thankfully one of our neighbors does. So we will likely get this bird back when it's ready for it to be released, since we have all of that intake information. But for right now, we are wishing him well in his journey to recovery. Then just a couple of quick highlights again from this year. It's kind of hard to look back on the year as a whole when we aren't finished with it yet, but we did have 2 golden eagles brought in earlier this year. We didn't have any golden eagles brought in last year. Usually we get 1 or 2, so that was kind of unusual. We have had a couple great-tailed grackles brought in, a couple purple finches, and a couple western meadowlarks. So these were a couple of the oddballs that we don't see super often, and we're kind of getting into the fall and then eventual winter season where we'll be getting a lot more of the cedar waxwings and hermit thrushes brought in. So kind of transitioning from our summer birds into our fall and winter birds. All right, the note that I wanted to end on here, as I always like to end these kinds of presentations, are ways that we all can help our local wildlife. And a number of these points, again, as members of the Audubon, you've probably already seen or heard various places, but it's always worth reiterating. This was one of the Steller's jays that we had in this year, by the way. We don't get as many of the Stellers as we do scrub jays, and thankfully this year we had multiple Stellers come in at roughly the same time, so we were able to buddy them up. That's not something that happens with us super frequently, so it was nice to have it this year. So the first thing that's big for you guys is to record the bird sightings that you have. If you use iNaturalist, I highly encourage it. I'm personally a big fan of their Seek app to identify things. But this data is really helpful for rehabbers, for us to scout out areas to release patients. We need to get these animals back out into suitable habitats, and how we judge that is if that species is present there. This is especially helpful for us in tracking the movements of migratory species. We did this quite frequently last fall as we were getting various birds sent back out to rejoin migration, especially if it's a patient that came in at the tail end of its migration and we want to make sure it buddies back up with its own species. We very heavily rely on tools like iNaturalist to help us figure out where these birds are currently hanging around. It should go without saying to please pick up and properly dispose of fishing line and hooks. As we saw with our osprey, this can cause a lot of harm when left out for wildlife to stumble into. It's not the first, and it certainly will not be the last patient brought in that we have to extract from fishing gear. We also recommend people wait to prune their trees and shrubs to between October and December. This is the best window that you can work with to avoid disturbing birds and mammals that are nesting in these trees. So people often call us up actually on our hotline in the spring and say, hey, is it okay if I trim my tree right now? And the answer is usually no. Please don't, because there's probably squirrels living in there and you don't want to get an angry squirrel on you. We also, of course, encourage people to keep their cats inside and then use leashes or harnesses when walking pets outside. It keeps wildlife safe from your pets. It also keeps your pets safe from wildlife. You don't want your dog running off into a bush and coming back to you smelling like a skunk. We are big fans of catios here. They can be a great alternative to allowing your cats roaming freely. They can still enjoy the outside world while not terrorizing the local wildlife. We also strongly encourage people to clean their bird feeders and bird baths regularly to prevent the spread of diseases. This was especially big earlier in the year when we were dealing with a lot of the H. pie outbreaks going around. So that was kind of a general thing put out to the public to either take your bird feeders or bird baths down for a bit while HPI was kind of increasing. And then as it was going back into a lull, just making sure that you're cleaning those often. And then finally, we, of course, say please avoid using sticky traps and rat or mouse poison. These always have a way of ending up in animals that is not what you intended. And that's how we unfortunately end up having to very gently using way too much canola oil extract patients off of sticky traps, and they're not very happy with us while we do that. If patients ever do end up getting brought in on sticky traps, we always say, please bring them on the sticky trap instead of trying to get it off yourself. Because a lot of well-meaning people will try and do that and do a lot more harm than good. We had a couple of jays brought in at one point with a ton of feathers pulled out that they had to regrow because somebody tried to do their best to get it off the sticky trap. Thankfully, this was not one of them. I believe this guy was an orphaned case. And now he grew up beautifully and is now back out. But that is pretty much everything that I have for right now. So I thank you all very much for having me and listening to me ramble for 55 minutes. And I, of course, had to add on my last slide here a couple highlights of some of the different animals that we had brought in between last year and this year. All of these pictures were either taken by myself or our other staff and volunteers at the hospital. So this is one of our golden eagles from earlier in the year. This guy, I will point out, is not technically a patient. We have a number of fence lizards that live outside our intake area. This is one of them. One of my coworkers has named this guy Leonardo. He has a name specifically. We also have a lot of hatchling fence lizards outside right now that we're all trying to avoid stepping on. But yeah, I will open it up now to questions that you may have. Yes.
So we usually use eBird for our
Mm-hmm.
bird sightings. Does that work for the rehab? Or is that something we should be working into more dynamic?
I'm sure it does get used, but the one that we specifically refer to more often is iNaturalist. So that's another thing.
You look into eBird.
eBird as well.
Probably 100 times more bird data on eBird than you do on iNaturalist.
Yeah, and it's very likely that that gets used too, but iNaturalist was the one that was made aware to me.
Yeah,
But-
iNaturalist is great for everything, but for birds specifically,
Mhm.
eBird is where you're going to find all the data.
Yeah, that's really good to know. And
Largest bird database in the world.
I'm sure my coworkers know of that, but I'll let them know anyways.
Jillian, can you
Yes.
give us coaching on if we find a bird on the ground, what we can do besides driving down to one?
Yeah, so I believe I was told that there are no rehab centers up in this area.
Correct.
So what you would most likely want to do is call and reach out to a licensed rehabber for specific guidance, because it really does vary based on each individual case, if it's an orphan baby bird versus something that's injured. So if nothing else, you can call our hotline and say, I'm not going to be able to bring it in, but I'm just looking for some guidance on what best to do. Because unfortunately, a lot of these animals, people are legally not allowed to keep, obviously not as pets, but even if you are planning on releasing it, you do have to have all kinds of permits in place, especially for birds using the Migratory Bird Act. So I would say give a call to a licensed rehabber if you can. There's some information for all of the various state licensed rehabbers on CDFW's website, and they'd probably be able to give you the best specific information based on the case that you have.
And I know they do carpool, they figured out, they relay them down and the whole thing, so they can get them down to Sonoma a lot of the times.
Yeah, so it might be an instance of trying to hook you in with people that can help transport it someplace. It would be fantastic if we had more like licensed rehab facilities throughout the state, but unfortunately with all the new regulations in place, that just got a lot more difficult for people as well. But we're doing the best that we can with everything. It's just going to be a bit of a headache for the foreseeable future. Yes. You're totally fine.
On the injured birds, do you think, is there a larger proportion of immature birds? I just noticed, I'm always just casually watching birds, and it seems like the post-fledglings that haven't really gained skills and definitely haven't learned caution, like they get themselves into trouble more.
It very much
Can you
feels
repeat
like.
the question for Zoom?
Yeah, so the question was about the proportion of birds that come in with injuries being juvenile versus adults, or like that post-fledge awkward teenage stage. And we certainly do see a fair number of each, and it very much depends on the time of year. I hate that so many of my answers is it depends, but that's kind of the nature of the beast. During the summer season, when we have a lot more birds that are nesting, we have more young fledglings, we do see an uptick in those patients. We do see a lot of nestling patients as well, that a cat has gone over and taken out of the nest, or a strong gust of wind blew the nest out of the tree and now they have an injury from falling. So during the summer season, we do see a bit of a more even mix of things, different life stages, but once we get into the fall and winter season, it's definitely more adults, which kind of makes sense after they've had their babies for the year. And I think you said you had another question?
Yeah, about how things are declared exotic or not. Like, the red collared doves, those are definitely exotic to you. Do you say, sorry, good luck, but no?
Yeah, something like Eurasian collared doves are something that we do not intake. Those would primarily be deferred to animal shelters, animal rescues. Some of the like fancier pigeon breeds that people keep as pets and get loose, those would get referred to vet hospitals, animal shelters that would be able to rehome them. As far as like rock doves go, that's not a native species, but we're able to refer that to a facility that does have the capacity to intake those. For other exotics, I'm going to blank on a lot of the names of things, but the first thing that comes to mind are exotic snakes that people keep as pets. And they get out different kinds of boas, for example. People bring them in and say, it's a snake, I don't know what to do with this. But we can't necessarily rehab and then release these species, so we have to refer them to various reptile organizations that are better equipped to caring for them and then ultimately helping to rehome them. So
Those are not native here, or are they?
I'm not sure. Rubber boas? Yeah, because that is one that I've seen in our past hospital data, because our data set goes back to like 1991, and I know we have had those come in previously, but not recently. So that one is, but if you think about like boa constrictors, things that people keep as pets, yes.
Okay, but this one really bothered me, that fox squirrels, what, and imported probably 100 years ago? Or at least, I don't know where it was.
Then you really start to get into the logistics of what is and is not invasive. Yeah. It's very difficult, and certain facilities may have different definitions that they work off of than others.
How widely are they, I haven't been back in California that long, and how widely are they found in the state? Does every major city have them?
How widely spread the fox squirrels are? Well, considering they are one of our most
Yeah, I saw it.
brought in species, at least in our area, I see them all the time. I'm not entirely sure up this neck of the woods how that is, but for us, the fox squirrels are always up there as one of our top 5 intakes. So at least in the Bay Area, they're pretty prevalent.
We have more gray squirrels up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Depending how far back you go, they're the little squirrels, and I can never remember what they're
Giant
called.
squirrels and
And
rabbits.
then
Yeah.
we also have chipmunks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's funny because it's the eastern fox squirrel, and when I was in grad school out east, I saw these guys. So I've seen them out in Virginia, DC area. I've seen them here, and I'm from the Midwest, and I've never seen them in the Midwest. Or maybe I've seen 1 or 2, but mostly we have gray squirrels, and specifically black gray squirrels where I'm from. You have any other questions?
You want to open up to Zoom?
No.
All right.
I'm not sure, we never really, maybe if you want to extend that invitation on the mic and let people know.
Yeah, if anyone on Zoom has questions that they would like to pose as well that we can grab out of chat. Otherwise, I can, yes, over here.
What I find is interesting, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, I started working with Lindsay in 1974,
Very cool.
when we were in the pump house. And what I find interesting is that your numbers are so different from the numbers that we had. And I was down there until 1998, so I did a lot of training in the new, training people in the new facility. But we saw lots of bullets Orioles.
Yeah.
You said you had one.
Yeah.
And we
The
had
species
one.
definitely have fluctuated over the
Yeah,
years.
It's just really fascinating to see your numbers. And we were keeping track then, but there were no computers.
Mhm.
And that there's such a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
And our possums were not the biggest at that point.
There's actually a funny story about that.
Yeah, I
There's-
think it was a squirrel.
Yeah, that wouldn't
Also, we had
surprise me.
gophers.
The funny thing with the Virginia opossum that was brought to my attention, I can't remember the year that it was specifically, but looking at the trend line of Virginia opossums brought in each year, it was a fairly low number. And then at one point it just spiked and it has stayed up since then. And we like to joke and point and place blame because Chris Beard, our volunteer coordinator in the hospital, he says when he started on the opossum home care team was the year that it spiked. So we all blame him for the fact that we get so darn many opossums brought in. We all say it's Chris's fault, and he fully takes the blame for it.
Yeah, it's hard to tell, isn't it, if it's a natural phenomenon or just people being more aware.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting too, looking back, because our overall total number of patients has declined over the number of years, but also our release rate, our survival rate has gone up. So we might not be getting, we're still getting an average of 5,000 patients every year, but in the years of yore, it was a lot higher than that. But now as medicine has gotten better, as our understanding of these species and their care has gotten better, their survivability has gone up. Yeah.
Cool.
Any other questions? Thank you, folks.